When I was in school many years ago, we were taught that Alexander Graham Bell's first words over his newly developed telephone were something like telling his assistant, "Come here." I tell people that is wrong. The first words heard over the telephone were, "We've been trying to reach you about your car's extended warranty." I usually get a laugh. You hate me, but not for telling lame jokes. I know you do. You want proof? Okay, here it is. I am a telemarketer. Told you so. I started out with in-person cold calls, then graduated to supervisor of a herd of callers. Now, I oversee the robocalls for car warranties, credit cards with special credit card rates, and replacement windows. I'm not going to tell you my real name for obvious reasons. If I meet you in a bar and you find out what I do and you're a female, you either slap me, throw the drink I bought you in my face, or walk away in disgust, if not all three. If you meet me in a bar and you're a man, you just beat the shit out of me. For my own protection, I will call myself John Smith. When I meet a new person and they ask what I do for a living, I say I am in advertising. Hopefully, they don't ask anymore. I do my best to avoid telling people what I really do. Most people think that used car salesmen, IRS auditors, and telemarketers should be banned from the human species allowed in bars. I disagree. We have more need to get drunk on a regular basis than people with other occupations. Those that find out my job usually ask, I never respond to a telemarketer. Why in the world do they keep calling? I answer that enough people do respond and buy enough products or services that it makes this particular way of advertising profitable. Otherwise, telemarketing would disappear. Everyone then says they wish it would. I was slowly sucked into the job I have. I graduated college with a history and political science major/minor. Guess how many employers want someone with those credentials? My parents and I couldn't afford a master's, much less a PhD, so I went looking for work. I found out that having a college degree did not mean employers were ready to move you into a management position. My choice was to start at the bottom or stay unemployed. Guess what? It's crowded at the bottom. As bills became due and my income was short, I finally applied at the one place that never turned down a person with the credentials of being A and B, alive and breathing telemarketing. The beauty of the job I had was the potential for commissions. If I sold a warranty from a cold call, I got a bonus. With my hourly wage and occasional bonuses, I was making as good as or better than my friends with real jobs. The reality of what I was making reduced my interest in jobs I thought I would like more. With promotions and a percentage of my crew's commissions from sales made it difficult to consider job offers which were usually just above minimum wage. I needed two things to get my mind off work, alcohol and pussy, not that I considered those two things as being separated. Sure, I have had alcohol without pussy, but I never had pussy without alcohol until I was married. In hindsight, I probably should have continued to combine the two. I'm going to skip the part of my story where I wooed and won the heart of a fair maiden. I married Jane Jones. My original plan was not to tell my dates about my work until I thought they were hooked on me. It did not work well. I either didn't get far enough along in the relationship before they found out my game, or I was left with a broken heart when I got turned down after disclosing my occupation. I finally started hitting on some of the female telemarketers. I hung outside with the smokers. I discovered that most of the women smoked and many of those were not short of other vices also. I betted a few before I picked the woman with the saddest story and the most willing to please. Jane Jones was a single parent, estranged from her conservative, religious parents who disapproved of premarital sex. Abandoned by her child's father without any support, she struggled to make ends meet. My assistance, both financially and emotionally, was a welcome relief for her. Eventually, our relationship turned intimate, and we formed a family unit with her and her child in my small apartment. Despite the cramped space, Jane never complained. We found happiness in each other's company, alleviating the struggles we faced individually. With time, Jane pursued education and career growth in the nursing field, eventually becoming a registered nurse. Meanwhile, my career also progressed, allowing us to move into a better home and provide for our daughter, Haley. Our family life seemed perfect, filled with movie nights and moments of closeness. However, as life became busier, our intimacy and shared time diminished. Looking back, I realized that Jane's increasing professional responsibilities, especially among doctors, contributed to our relationship's decline. Her growing distance and disrespect signaled trouble, but I was too caught up in our hectic lives to address it. When Haley turned 16 and gained independence, Jane sought a new romantic relationship with an older doctor. Despite feeling betrayed, Haley and I agreed it was best to support her decision. After the divorce, I focused on my finances and took in a roommate to ease expenses. Meanwhile, my parents reached out about my uncle, who was battling cancer and needed assistance. Remembering fond memories of him, I welcomed the opportunity to support him in his time of need, adding a new dynamic to my life after Jane's departure. Mike and I shared some memorable moments together, especially during the nights when he felt well enough to join me for drinks. He regaled me with amusing stories about my father's antics as a child, and we bonded over cigars on my patio. Despite his declining health, Mike seemed unbothered by the consequences of indulging in vices, and I was too preoccupied with my recent divorce to care much about the potential risks. One evening, Mike approached me with a serious tone. "John, knowing how sick I am, I decided to spend my remaining time with the few people who truly care about me. If I wanted to be alone, I could afford to hire caregivers. Your father was more tolerant of me than the rest of the family, so I reached out to him first. He mentioned that you were the one who appreciated my company the most and could benefit from some financial assistance. I've cherished the past few months spent with you, and I've discussed my will with your father. Originally, I planned to leave my money to him and your mother, but he declined. You see, I didn't always earn my money through conventional means, and he didn't want it tainted. He left the decision to you. Can I leave it to you? Uncle Mike, I've valued our time together tremendously. You've helped me through a difficult period in my life, and I'm grateful. As for the money, it's yours to allocate as you wish. While I could use some financial relief after my divorce, I'm not in dire need. My ex-wife didn't hesitate to take what she felt entitled to, regardless of how it was earned. I'll appreciate any support from you, but I hope it won't be necessary for a long time. Thank you. I don't anticipate it being too long. In the meantime, how about we enjoy a drink, a good cigar, and perhaps indulge in some adult entertainment or invite some companions over? Several weeks later, Uncle Mike passed away, and the turnout at his funeral was minimal. My father and I were the only attendees at his burial. I learned that I was the sole beneficiary of his life insurance policy, amounting to $50,000. Although saddened by his passing, I found solace in the financial boost, which helped offset some of the losses from my divorce and provided support for my daughter, Haley. I was surprised to be the only one summoned to Uncle Mike's attorney's office for the will reading. I had anticipated a modest inheritance, but the lawyer's preamble hinted at something more intriguing. Mr. Smith, your uncle was quite adept at accumulating wealth through means that many would consider immoral or illegal. However, before his passing, he took steps to ensure that his assets were settled with both the federal government and certain individuals of Italian descent, alleviating any concerns regarding potential repercussions for inheriting his fortune. The will is straightforward. Your uncle converted all his assets to cash, providing you with a cashier's check for $4,459,982. I advise consulting a financial advisor promptly to manage your newfound wealth wisely. Stunned, I wasted no time in depositing the check at my bank, where it was verified as authentic. Then, I visited my father, who was astonished by the amount. He agreed to only take what he needed for retirement, so I insisted he accept a bit more due to inflation. Despite the windfall, my heart burned with a desire for revenge against Jane and her now husband. It wasn't a materialistic desire, but a longing for justice. The first step was purchasing the house next to Jane's, which wasn't even on the market. After settling in, I threw a lavish party and invited the neighbors, making sure to flaunt my newfound wealth with expensive amenities and beautiful escorts. Jane and her husband attended, visibly surprised by my presence. When Jane confronted me about the source of my wealth, I retorted with disdain, refusing to divulge any details to her. She accused me of jealousy and irresponsibility, reminding me of my financial obligations towards our daughter. I agreed to meet with our daughter alone, emphasizing her newfound independence as an adult. Despite Jane's hesitations, our daughter expressed a desire to visit, uncertain of my receptiveness. I have no qualms about meeting with her. She's not the one who betrayed me, I said firmly. When Haley visited, it was a joyous reunion. She admired the house and was pleasantly surprised to find that she had a room of her own. I offered her $10,000 to decorate it to her liking, regardless of whether she stayed or not. We spent quality time together, and she adorned her room with the latest gadgets and filled her closet with new clothes. By the end of the week, she drove home in her new BMW Z4, having traded in the Toyota Camry her stepfather had given her. Her new car was fully paid for, with insurance covered for a year in advance. I held the belief that once a cheater, always a cheater, and I acted on that assumption. I hired a top private investigation firm to gather evidence of Jane and Richard's infidelities. Soon, I had recordings, pictures, and videos of both of them with their respective lovers. As far as I knew, neither was aware of the other's indiscretions. On the same day, both Jane and Richard received envelopes containing evidence of their affairs. The enclosed letters threatened legal action for alienation of affection against the individuals involved and the hospitals where they worked. That night, Haley called, asking if she could move into her room in my house due to the volatility at home. Before she could settle in, Jane called, asking if she could stay with us as her husband had kicked her out. Jane tried to maintain composure, but I could see the truth beneath her facade. I had won, and she had lost. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. I showed Jane to her room, which was furnished with items from our old house. I gave her the freedom to redecorate with the $10,000 I offered. She became emotional, questioning why I assumed she would want to return. My other dreams have come true. Why not my favorite dream? If you came crawling back, it would be perfect, I remarked. Jane was moved to tears. I played the indifferent host to Jane, while Haley's requests were granted without hesitation. Jane took on household chores, but I refrained from praising her efforts. One night, she broke down and confessed her regrets about our marriage and her arrogance working with doctors. I forgave her, but made it clear that I wouldn't take the risk of marrying her again. I supported her through her divorce and suspension from her nursing license without expecting anything in return. Over time, she grew accustomed to our new dynamic, finding some comfort in our arrangement. John, I appreciate your kindness despite everything I've done to you. This house is starting to feel like home, but before I get too comfortable, I need to know how long you'll allow me to stay and what you expect from me in return. Jane, I loved you before, and I still do now. All I've ever wanted is for you to be happy. You can stay here as long as you need to. I expect that you'll want to move out once you've regained your nursing license. All I ask is that you refrain from bringing any dates or lovers here until then. It's too painful for me. If you're wondering about us getting back together, I'd like us to have occasional intimate moments, if you're open to it. But that's all it would be. Despite the restriction on seeing other men and the lack of interest from potential suitors, we found ourselves engaging in sexual activities almost as frequently as when we were married, if not more. Jane's participation felt more genuine and uninhibited than before. She seemed genuinely happy, and her affectionate gestures were a stark contrast to her previous behavior. Periodically, she'd check if our agreement still stood, and I'd humorously reassure her that the warranty could be extended. I'll admit, I was uncertain about what I truly wanted. Jane was still attractive and a fantastic lover, but I couldn't fully trust her. As she regained her license and resumed her work among doctors, I sensed her entitlement resurfacing. Hiring a private investigator confirmed my suspicions of her involvement in another affair or something close to it. I felt conflicted about what to do, but Jane unwittingly provided a solution. During a cozy dinner, Jane expressed her longing for our earlier days together in our old house. Suddenly, I had clarity. It took me a few weeks to finalize my plan. Jane, remember when you said you'd give anything to go back to our old life in our old house? I asked one evening. Of course, I meant it. All I need is you, she replied. Great, because that's exactly what we'll have, I revealed. I've bought back our old house, and I've already given away our wealth to your hospital. What? Are you insane? Jane exclaimed. No, I'm just doing what you said you wanted, I replied, showing her a fake newspaper headline announcing a large donation to her hospital. You tricked me. You still have your wealth, and now I have no chance of being your wife again, she realized. Not a chance, I confirmed. Your definition of we includes too many other men. She was stunned. You're still sure? I would have ended my affair if we were together again. Not even with an extended warranty, I replied firmly. Story 2. I never imagined I'd find myself in this situation, but here I am. This past weekend, my wife, 38F, and our daughter, 13F, went to visit her mom. I couldn't join them due to work commitments, so they planned to have a girls' weekend. As a firefighter in a large southern city, I was gearing up for a call when our dispatcher alerted me about an emergency. It wasn't related to my current assignment, so I checked my phone and discovered several texts from my daughter and an unfamiliar number. Through these messages, I learned that my daughter had fallen while ice skating and broken her wrist. She was at the emergency room, but they couldn't proceed with treatment because my wife was nowhere to be found. The unknown number belonged to a friend of my wife's who had accompanied the girls to the skating rink. Reluctantly, she admitted that my wife had left to have dinner with some random guy. We usually share our locations with each other due to the nature of my job, and when I checked her whereabouts, I found out she was at a hotel. It was already 10 p.m., and despite my attempts to reach her, she hadn't responded to my texts. However, she did eventually call our daughter. With the friend's help, our daughter received the necessary medical attention and was taken back to her grandmother's house. The friend then reached out to me, expressing her regret for the situation and revealing the guy's name, indicating that this had been happening whenever I wasn't around. Meanwhile, I've dedicated countless hours of overtime to provide for our family, paying off our house, funding luxurious vacations, and ensuring our daughter attends the best private school in the city. In hindsight, I feel deceived and foolish. Following the advice of many of you, I consulted with a lawyer. During our conversation, I realized that my wife doesn't have much access to her own money. I took precautionary measures, such as removing her as an authorized user of my credit cards and implementing two-factor authentication on various accounts. Upon reviewing my credit report, I discovered a joint credit card that she had opened without my knowledge. I printed out the charges, which revealed a detailed timeline of her expenses at restaurants and hotels. Additionally, I found accounts on Tinder and Bumble through recent phone bills. A friend who is a deputy sheriff will be present when she returns home tonight. I've arranged for her to stay at a nearby hotel for the week, and I've covered the expenses up front. My daughter is aware of the situation and is upset with her mother. I'm arranging for her to speak with someone, and thankfully, my job provides excellent insurance coverage. Once my wife and daughter are back home, I plan to be transparent with her mother about the situation. I've decided to take a few days off from work to handle everything. When my wife and daughter returned home late Sunday, my daughter retreated to her room immediately. My wife acknowledged the tension, to which I responded truthfully that I was numb. I explained that the anger would surface later, and for the time being, it would be best for her to stay elsewhere. My friend, the deputy sheriff, was present and offered to sit on the deck in case I needed support. I informed my wife that I was recording our conversation to safeguard my rights as a husband and father, to which she agreed. It seemed evident that she believed she could talk her way out of the situation. Unbeknownst to her, I had spent the past week seeking advice from friends, family, my battalion chief at work, as well as consulting with a lawyer and therapist. With ample leave and supportive colleagues, I could afford to take time off if needed. I expressed my disappointment in her actions, particularly in how they affected our daughter. It angered me that our child was caught in the midst of her reckless behavior, risking her well-being for her own desires. Rather than admitting or denying her actions, she attempted to redirect the conversation by reminiscing about happier times. I confronted her, expressing my inability to trust my memories given the circumstances. When her attempts to manipulate the conversation failed, she resorted to blaming her actions on loneliness due to my demanding work schedule. I reminded her of the agreement we made to secure a future where we could retire early. In my frustration, I emphasized that her betrayal had shattered that dream. Instead of retiring comfortably together, she would now have to work until an older age. While I'm not usually vindictive, I found solace in the idea of her enduring the consequences of her actions, laboring at a job she despised until she reached an older age. A colleague of mine, who is also married and has vacationed with us, made an observation that struck a chord. He noted that during our trips, there were instances where my wife contrived excuses to be away from the family. Reflecting on this, I confronted her, suggesting that this wasn't the first time such behavior had occurred, but rather the first time it had been discovered. She admitted to it quietly, which I recorded. Without objection, she went to the hotel and later sent me lengthy emails expressing remorse and confusion about her actions. Despite her attempts at reconciliation, I chose not to respond. Even before her return, I had spoken with her mother, informing her about the situation, including the fact that my wife was at a hotel with another man while our daughter was in the emergency room, and about the undisclosed credit card she had opened. Although her mother didn't say much, I made it clear that any involvement in aiding my wife's misconduct would result in restricted access to her granddaughter. Looking back, I may have acted impulsively out of anger. My mother-in-law insisted she was unaware of the situation and expressed concern for my wife's well-being during the time she was unreachable. I also conveyed to her that I was unwilling to allow my wife back into the house if I had a say in the matter. I emphasized that throughout our relationship, I had remained faithful and committed to the promises made when we got engaged. This resonated with her, especially considering her own experience with her husband's infidelity, which led to their separation during my wife's high school years. Perhaps this background influenced her understanding of the gravity of the situation. I sent a text to the friend who accompanied my daughter to the emergency room, expressing my gratitude for her support. However, I also made it clear that if she had prior knowledge of my wife's whereabouts, she played a significant role in the breakdown of my family, and a genuine friend wouldn't condone such behavior. While I haven't reached out to her husband yet, I suspect they may have been mutually encouraging each other. On Thursday morning, my wife informed me via text that her mother had arranged a furnished apartment near our house, and she requested to collect some personal belongings on Friday while I was at work. I agreed to this arrangement. Throughout this ordeal, my wife's communication with our daughter has been minimal, and she showed no concern for her well-being in our conversations. Notably, when she mentioned the apartment, she didn't inquire about our daughter's visitation. I informed her that I wouldn't be home on Friday but would step out for a couple of hours to allow her to retrieve her belongings. However, I arranged for a process server to deliver divorce papers and a notice of my intent to pursue sole custody upon her arrival. Her voicemail response was filled with anger and sounded emotionally unstable, marking the most enraged I've ever heard her. Additionally, my lawyer provided a practical suggestion that I'd like to share for others in a similar situation. I acquired a new cell phone and discontinued using the one associated with the number my wife knows. Only a select few individuals have been given the new number, including my lawyer, sister, daughter, boss, and a couple of close friends from work. I check the old phone once daily to address any necessary matters. While there's plenty of advice circulating, certain aspects like paternity testing aren't relevant as my daughter strongly resembles me. I'll undergo an STD panel as a precaution, although I don't anticipate any issues in that regard. My lawyer informed me of my wife hiring legal representation. However, I've made it clear that I intend to remain in the house with our daughter. While I may have to write her a substantial check due to family law intricacies, I'm indifferent at this point. If possible, I'd gladly increase the amount to expedite her departure by 6 months. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel not to miss new videos.